live.
Hey everybody, welcome to the M365 Dublin user group meetup for April. We've got two sessions on today, so very quickly we'll do a round of introductions and we'll get straight into it. So my name is Sean McAvenue, Microsoft 365 MVP, focusing around Microsoft Graph and more Copilot, I suppose. The session we've got on today, the first session, is around change management, which I think is more important than ever given the rapid pace of technology change. So I'm really looking forward to it. I'll pass over to Oni to introduce herself.
Hi everyone, my name is Onyema Debuko. I'm a Microsoft 365 MVP in Microsoft 365, likes of Microsoft 365 services, change management and adoption, and the likes. And I'm happy to join this session. And while we're waiting for Sarah to start and also Bas to do the Intune, I would hand over to Frank to introduce himself.
Hi everyone, I'm Frank Falvey from Cork in Ireland, and I'm a Microsoft MVP in the M365 Copilot category. And I'll just hand you over to Sarah. Sarah.
Yeah, thank you for having me this evening. I'm Sarah Wimberley. I'm principal and founder of Ulster Technologies, and I'm actually based in Philadelphia. So let me share my screen real quick and we will dive right in. And so as Sean mentioned, the first half of our kind of session this month is on change management. So we're going to walk through today some proactive ways that we can manage that change. So over the course of the next half hour or so, we're going to begin our understanding of change management and kind of how that works as an interdependent practice and proactive approach. We're going to learn how we can balance people, process, and technology to be effective and efficient through analyzing impact. And last but certainly not least, prepare ourselves to ultimately make those decisions from a place of courage instead of a place of fear. So again, I'm Sarah Wimberley. I'm the principal and founder of Ulster Technologies, and I connect technology with the human experience, primarily speaking about the intersections of delivering value and managing people. I've served as an enterprise architect, product owner, and program manager, primarily in the healthcare space, but in MarTech for about the last 20 years. So really just to kind of set the stage, what is change management? If you're not in a project management style role, sometimes it can feel really daunting. And it can even bring about kind of a fear reaction in a way. But hopefully through today's conversation, you can hopefully unveil that a little bit and pivot into a place of courage. So change management does need to be proactive. Reactionary really is where that fear comes in. And by being proactive, not only are we lessening the fear, we're never going to completely eliminate it in some situations, but hopefully by being proactive, we can move away from that kind of mindset and feeling. Change management also brings about outcomes that minimize confusion, boost morale, and maintain business continuity. So in times where even something as simple as creating an RFC for deployment, that brings in change management. Sometimes that's in really small, kind of seemingly simple ways, but the framework is still there, and you're still balancing people, processes, and technology. Through all of this, we are considering impacts, dependencies, and all of the stakeholders, the ones that are actively involved in the project, the ones that are quietly involved in the project, and even downstream stakeholders. So as we go through this delicate balance between people, process, and technology, want to kind of challenge you all to think of an issue or a problem that does keep you up at night. It does need to be bigger than, if you remember to send the email or set up the meeting, and something definitely smaller than, solving world peace, but something that's somewhere in the middle, that's you're passionate about solving, something that could improve your team, your division, your organization, or maybe even your industry. It could also be a personal challenge. So as we talk through the pillars of people, process, and technology, use this challenge as kind of the example to walk you through that. And hopefully you're able to, by the end of today's conversation, you can write down facts, questions, even assumptions and risks in each one of these kind of categories. So we are going to dive right into people. And to be totally honest, the people pillar encompasses really, it's pretty straightforward. It's the people that are part of the equation in this. Again, staff, management, leadership, end users, even the general public are part of this equation. And really the piece of the people part that is really kind of the most challenging sometimes is managing expectations. And transparent, proactive communication is a huge piece of that. That can absolutely be scary because being transparent brings up the opportunity for people to challenge you, right? To people to maybe disagree, but hopefully you're having constructive friction through those kinds of conversations. The plus side of this, that transparent, proactive communication is giving your stakeholders and your audience time to react and plan, ask questions, right? Raise concerns that maybe you didn't realize existed before, but can hopefully help everyone kind of adjust and react and pivot even a little bit to really manage the change appropriately. And knowing that you're building your brand really with every communication is a big deal, right? Having consistency and clarity and professionalism with those communications really can make or break it. And sometimes it's something as simple as just acknowledging that the fear exists, right? Acknowledging that the fear might even have really, really big negative impacts to the organization or the team or even the system. And sometimes just acknowledging that gives a lot of folks a level playing field to some degree, and kind of acknowledges that the fear is there and doesn't necessarily belittle it or hide it, and tuck it away. But sometimes acknowledging it is an important part of that communication. And we do need to consider the end user. So through focusing on, morale first and foremost, but the end users could be, the people that are directly engaged in the platform or in the change in and of itself, but all the way downstream. So building on those trusted relationships that you have and those cross-functional conversations from places where there is no active change happening, building on those relationships in times of less stress or maybe no stress at all, right? In these situations, those foundational trusted relationships are going to be even more important, so that then when there is intense collaboration needed or high stakes change happening, that foundational trust already exists, and folks can come to the individuals that are part of the change and the project, knowing that their feedback is going to be valued and they'll be heard. So with that, we will kind of pivot into the processes. And it's important from the process perspective to understand that process can sometimes be the toughest thing to really get right. To be totally honest, it can, everything we do in an organization, everything you do as an individual, whether it's, personal or professional, is a process in a way. And when that process is broken, we need to fix it. And we need to focus on fixing the process, not the person or the people involved in the process. Sometimes documentation is lacking. Sometimes we as individuals or teams don't necessarily have documentation that exists at all, or it hasn't been updated recently. Maybe the process has changed since the last time it was updated, and that documentation is well out of date. I've worked in a lot of organizations, especially in healthcare, where compliance is a huge deal, and making sure those documented processes are up to date is really a critical annual process that happens. And if you're not in as regulated of an industry as that, setting aside time before it becomes critical to get those key processes documented and then in a good routine with maintaining them is really important. Because it's really going to be the gut check to make sure that the process continues to add the intended and needed value for the bigger organization. Another important element of processes is a feedback loop. So in a lot of ways, when you're a product owner or you're in even an analyst and you're taking on requirements, a lot of that's coming in from feedback from end users or even backlogs and different stakeholders around the organization. So, but if you don't have a feedback loop or you're collecting feedback, but you're not doing anything about it, that ultimately impacts people and the technology. So having a solid process for that feedback loop is really key, because you want to make sure that you're adding value to the end product and the platform that you're working on. And if the feedback loop doesn't exist or it's not working, that's definitely creating additional friction. And collecting that feedback is another big element of change. So if you have a mobile app and you're getting feedback on the App Store, low ratings, high ratings, comments, no comments, that's just as important as people reporting bugs or leaving comments on websites and things like that to give feedback to an organization. A lot of times the feedback, it's important to know that sometimes the feedback we get isn't delivered with the most tact or as maybe diplomatically as we would like. We might be also not hearing it when we're in the right place to really get that feedback, but it's important to continue to get that feedback often, whether it's about us personally and our work in our organization or about the product and the platform that we're working on. Because the ultimate goal is to make it better, right? Continuous improvement, whether we evolve as individuals or the product or the platform is evolving, the whole point of it is to make it better. So if we're asking for feedback and we're not doing anything about it, then that in and of itself is a broken process. So we'll move into technology here. And technology honestly can, for some organizations, big and small, it can sometimes feel like it's the easy part, right? Just go find the tool and do the thing and implement it and start using it. But getting the wrong tool can really mean that your processes aren't fully realized. And ultimately, your team members are actually spending more time doing admin work than they were before when they maybe needed to do the manual process to accomplish the same business goal. So there's absolutely due diligence there that organizations and teams need to be doing, that we can't skip or shortcut to make sure that we're bringing in the right products, the right technology for the right reasons. We need to make it easy for our internal and external stakeholders to understand the goals and buy into it. So proactive communication, the why of what we're doing, what the objectives of the new technology is, the problem it's going to solve. Every organization has kind of different formats for this, whether it's an IPA for funding or it's other templates and materials that need to be filled out by the requester to kind of put your arms around the scope of the project. But in some ways too, we do jump to the answer to just bring in something new. And if we pause for a moment before Googling the best solution for X problem, we can also look internally. There could be ways to prototype or pilot using an existing tool that your organization might already have, which might actually even be lower cost than what you might have already considered bringing in. And that kind of is a try before you buy scenario to some degree. And ultimately, it might ultimately fail, and that's okay. But by failing, you'll know more and a better idea of what you really need to then go make those future conversations with new vendors all the more productive. And leveraging the documentation that you may have updated or created in the process side of this equation, it's a big deal, to be totally honest, to also have your change control processes documented, just like you maybe have your RFC process documented, or how ServiceNow processes might work or Workfront process might work. All of those kind of automated approvals and things like that really all do need to be documented so that we can validate how they should be working, so that when something goes wrong, we know kind of how to course correct in our own way. And transparency in technology here, just like with communication from a people perspective, can absolutely be a challenge. And it definitely plays into kind of making it easy for stakeholders to buy in, because especially working with outside vendors, I'm sure a lot of us have seen that getting details on roadmaps and ticket statuses even can be really difficult. And it can almost feel like even for internal teams, you're kind of losing control because you're letting too much detail like outside of the inner circle in a way. But it can also be really empowering, which is an important kind of aspect of this to consider, because you're sharing your knowledge, right? And you're building advocacy for the work that, even though you might own it, you're building advocacy for when you're not in the room. So by being transparent and proactively creating a space for people to ask questions and openly share work item status and blockers and things like that, you're not just, avoiding meetings for meeting's sake, which in and of itself is incredibly stressful, but we're also in a point where you're allowing those business side decision makers to maybe look up updates for themselves in Workfront and not IM the team every 2 days or something for an update, or even reprioritize the work as maybe senior leadership pivots on a decision. And transparency in a roadmap, again, with clients or from products to internal teams, can sometimes feel like you're committing to a delivery that might be a little gray. But it's also another opportunity for feedback and insights, because you might be prioritizing something lower than you really should be. And by being transparent in a proactive way, you'll get that feedback loop, which can only make the product better in the long run. So I do have a little bit of time left. So I have some use cases. We'll kind of talk through some scenarios, and we'll I have quite a few, but we'll use the time we have as best we can. So right out of the gate, I do have one we can kind of talk through on AI adoption. So we'll go through the people, the process, and the technology pillars to really kind of frame up in this scenario how those are kind of at play. So from a people perspective, I think it's pretty common knowledge, or at least I've heard it an awful lot. We talked about how AI fails not because of the technology per se, but because the human in the loop is confused or resistant to change. And so building trust early and proactively is really key to reducing the fear of this, right? Whether that's fear of people losing their job, being like monitored or surveilled or micromanaged. And really, this is an opportunity, and hopefully you can communicate it as an opportunity where their role might be unfortunately getting displaced, but it also could be an opportunity for them to upskill. And they're still the subject matter experts on this process. So they can learn how the AI works, maybe be an admin of the process in that way and monitor it. And then maybe even move on to bigger and better roles that build upon their AI knowledge. And at the very least, they can become a champion for change. So take their newfound expertise and understanding and background in not only AI, but also change management, and start to increase adoption to other teams and through other workflows. From a process perspective, it's really important to acknowledge that AI will not fit in every scenario. And I think, at least in my experience, I've seen a lot of organizations kind of try to shoehorn it in because there's an expectation to build or create, some number of widgets or some number of opportunities for an AI to insert themselves. And there is not always an ideal solution that involves AI. And that's an important aspect to acknowledge and really have honest and open conversations and transparent conversations about where AI would be ideal and where it wouldn't be ideal. We always need to keep the human in the loop, whether it's simply, monitoring the process and, keeping an eye on hallucinations and access, making sure that the data that's backing the AI is always as up to date, and there's no kind of gaps and errors from that perspective, but also reviewing the outputs and not just publishing or launching, what the AI creates without any kind of gut check there. We also need to work through governance. So who's going to own the decisions? Who's going to prioritize what AI bots and agents are even being created? Where are the guardrails, right? What access will the bots have or not have? Governance is really a huge part of a process that is backed by solid technology, but still incorporates and really should build upon the organizational governance and guardrails your team and your division and organization already have. And again, feedback loops are huge, not just to improve the models and usage, but also, if there's consistent governance challenges or consistent situations that, maybe you do put AI into a workflow and it's actually doing more harm than good or creating more confusion, and it is building and creating more admin work for the team than if you just went back to the manual process. That feedback loop is huge to make sure that AI is being used appropriately in those specific scenarios. And last kind of frame here for technology, even strong AI applications can fail when the infrastructure and the data isn't up to snuff, Google actually released a recent kind of infrastructure report, and I think it was in the high 80s or low 90s, where the infrastructure across organizations is just not prepared for this. So AI coming in, you could want to adopt it and use it and go completely kind of bonkers with implementing it. But if the underlying infrastructure and data quality and access doesn't exist or isn't there or is not scalable enough to support AI adoption, you're going to hit a wall, and you might actually hit that wall pretty quickly if you're not running those kinds of improvements from an infrastructure perspective in parallel. Ultimately, the tools need to align with user needs. So despite all the technical capabilities and, you might realign the data quality standards and scale up infrastructure and tweak the infrastructure where you might need. But if it's not going to be, supporting user needs or supporting business needs and realizing the business value, there might not be a place for that, or might not be a place for AI. And last but certainly not least, the scalability and interoperability here is, I think, a newly realized challenge that's coming across in larger organizations where it's really exacerbating silos, and it's exacerbating those kind of tough, maybe even broken processes where, we're adding on this layer of complexity in a way that we're hoping will help. But because of the silos that exist, whether it's data silos or platform silos or even team organizational resource management silos, when we're trying to somehow, combine all of that into a solid AI model or an agentic, use case, it's those gaps and disconnects become even more obvious in a way. And we need to kind of take our time in a way and take a step back when that does happen, and step back and really figure out, is the AI coming up with a challenge that we really need to resolve to push forward, or is this not a place where AI really fits for our use cases? So I do have a couple more use cases, but I'll pause here for questions. Happy to kind of open to the floor. I'll kind of move my screens around a little bit and see if anything's coming through the chat, but appreciate the time, and happy to pause here in case there's any questions.
Sorry, my internet was dropping there.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
So I was going to ask, because it's something I see with customers a lot, and I think it's changing. Do you think broadly people are understanding how much value there is in change management, as opposed to a few years ago where we kind of saw some difficulty like getting people to realize it?
I think it's becoming more commonplace. I think there's pockets of it. I think in it's never going to be an easy kind of thing to adopt because the components of change management, especially the technology, is constantly changing. And it's absolutely difficult to keep up with that. I do think change management as a broad concept is kind of picking up steam a little bit because more and more people are acknowledging that there needs to be a framework in place and it has to be proactive to have any of this be remotely successful. But there's absolutely still, organizations and teams and individuals that absolutely struggle with it.
Yeah, and I think do you think it's probably gaining a lot of traction with AI investments where people need to, I suppose, support that rapid pace of change?
Yeah, I think it is because I think more and more like I mentioned, the gaps are being exacerbated when it comes to AI. So you have this great idea, let's have an agent, do this analysis on some data for us and come up with recommendations on how to, make whatever the X or Y more effective or efficient. And it can't do that. Or the answers the AI gets are opposite or different or wildly inaccurate versus the human that was kind of doing it manually in parallel. So it could be something as simple as the agent didn't have the right data access. But I think there's absolutely opportunities there where small pockets, it's proving to work. And then others, it's really just highlighting the existing challenges that an organization might have, that if those silos aren't broken down, the cumbersome processes aren't fixed and realized and pushed forward, then AI is definitely not going to make anything better.
Awesome. So I might pass to only Frank, or if we've had any questions come in through the chat.
Yeah, I don't see any questions coming in through the chat on my end anyway.
I don't have any question from my end as well.
Okay.
Well, I will stop sharing and pass the torch. Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah, and
Thanks,
before we move on to Bas, I want to say, Sarah, thanks so much for the session. I think you're on completely different time to us, so I do appreciate it.
Of course, yeah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and we'd definitely love to have you back at some point.
Thanks.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks, Sarah.
Awesome. So our next session, Bas, I think you're there now, and hopefully you can share your screen. But I'll let you introduce your own session and yourself, I suppose.
Yeah. Hi. Can everybody hear me well?
Yeah.
I hope I set it up correctly.
Yep.
Let me see.
Yes, so when you go share your screen, yeah, I can see it there.
There we go.
There we go. We have it. Intune alerting.
Yeah. Okay. Then I guess I should just get going. All right. So I'll be talking about alerting on Intune in 2026. Is it a realistic expectation? Is it completely fiction? We'll look into it. First off, of course, obligatory introduction slide. So I'm Sebastian. I'm an automation engineer. I work for Erxus, which is a Belgian Microsoft-focused company. And my background is mostly in Microsoft 365 and Azure. So yeah, that's me. We will be looking at today what is currently available. I mean, pretty much anything that already exists without having to set up anything yourself. We're going to look into what is possible to do. Also, what you would need to actually be able to do those things. And finally, what a finished flow could possibly look like. All right, let's start off with what is currently available. So, Intune. It's a great tool. It currently has many things. It's a great tool for endpoint management, application management. You could do compliance policies. It already has a lot of built-in reports itself, which you can look at and download. However, unfortunately, most of it is individual data that cannot be linked can be linked in a meaningful way manually. Any useful information only exists in those built-in reports, but then again, those are only built-in, and you have to download those manually as well. Which means that what's missing? Well, any reports you could set up yourself, and possibly some custom alerts, of course. There are other nice to have things that are missing from Intune, but we will focus on these two today to keep it a bit brief. Some examples on what would be nice to have. For example, some information about non-compliant devices, but specifically combined with their offending rules and their compliance policies. It's currently possible to see those, but you have to click every individual device with every compliance policy to see which rule is actually being broken, which can be quite a hassle if you have a large organization. So wouldn't it be nice to have a combined view with all that information? Or maybe some devices, if they're up to date with the latest Windows version or not, based if they have hot patch enabled or not, or if they are on a different build than everybody else or a different channel. Again, not very easy to see in a flash. Again, would be nice to have. Maybe some configuration policies that some engineers set up 2 months ago and then hasn't touched for a while, but isn't actually being used. Wouldn't it be nice to know which ones those are and clean those up so everything looks a bit nicer and is more organized? Some historical device performance data spanning over multiple months and then grouping it by model to see which models are or which devices are performing the best in your organization and which ones have the most issues. These are all things, the information is there, but it's not currently possible to see that in Intune without spending 2 days clicking through menus. But even outside of Intune, what would be nice to have in terms of alerting, maybe some app registration secrets or certificates that are going to expire soon is also a great example. So what can we do? Since the tools on Intune are very limited, we're going to do it ourselves. How do we go about that? So Intune gets their data from the Graph API. It uses the Graph API itself. You can actually see this if you have a bit of time left over in your busy day. You can check out the network tab in your browser and see that anything you open up in Intune, but also Entra ID or Azure or many Microsoft portals, it actually uses the Graph API to gather the data. What does that mean? That API is accessible to end users, which means you can access that today for free, which is great, of course. There's a link in the slides, which will be available after the presentation, to the documentation for the Graph API. But what does that mean? Any data on Intune that exists, which is gathered with the Graph API, which is all data in Intune, is available to you as raw data, which can be gathered yourself. An API also means that automation. It's very possible and very easy to automate processes to gather the data and then process it yourself outside of Intune. Which brings me to my next point. That all sounds great, but there are some caveats that I'd like to put a spotlight to before we move on, namely data quality. What do I mean by data quality? Well, specifically, there's a data timeline that I made. Is this happens pretty much. So first, the device data changes. It enforces a new policy, it updates an application. This can be many different things. Then Intune pulls in the new information. However, this is not live. That would be very expensive on a device to run a 24/7 agent that just immediately updates Intune with anything. So it's not in every single case, it's not live data that you're getting, which means Intune is already a little bit behind. Then if you pull in the data that Intune also has on a supposedly later time, that data is again a little bit late, a little bit out of date. And then you can process data, you can fire alerts on everything, great. But that means, as a general rule, that Intune is not constantly monitoring the enrolled devices. So Intune is already behind on the current state of the device, which means you would be too. It's not a deal breaker, but it's definitely something to be aware of. We can look into alerting and reporting, but not on a scale that would be like priority one issues, like devices that have like virus checking or whatever. This is definitely not possible to do with Intune because of this particular thing. So yeah, that's there you go. You're not up to date with the actual state of a device. It's great for historical data. It's great for trends. It's great for non-hyper urgent alerting. But when you do want to have something or look into something that should be handled immediately, this is definitely not the way to go. Keep that in mind. Okay, we continue. What do you actually need? We're going to get the data from Intune using the Graph API. Since the Intune portal uses the Graph API itself, we can too using an app registration, which is easy to set up. The difficult part is, I'll get back to that. This is the overview, my bad. So an app registration, to actually access the Graph API, we're gonna store and process the data somewhere that we're gonna pull in. And then we also need a way to manage the alerts and reports that we want to have. Those are the three things we will look into today. First of all, the app registration, which I started a bit early. You can create a new one, you can reuse another one. It doesn't particularly matter. Creating one isn't too difficult, but the real challenge is finding out which API permissions you actually need to grant. They're all listed, which ones are possible, but it isn't always very clear which ones you will need to look at stuff. A lot is documented. However, there's a big issue with the Graph API, or a bit of a quirk, which means specifically the version 1.0 and the beta. Now, what does that mean? The API has two specific versions. The version 1.0 is promoted as the main version of the Graph API. That's the one you're supposed to use. That's the one that is fully documented and works, I want to say perfectly, but my experience has told me otherwise. But it's supposedly perfectly. But then again, you have also the beta. What a beta insinuates, of course, that there is a lot of testing going on, that things aren't permanent. This is not how Microsoft is treating this exactly. So what comes on beta? A lot of stuff for Intune. How do I know this? Is because Microsoft uses the beta itself in their portals. They tell you in the documentation, you're not supposed to use it, but then they use it themselves in the production environments. So take that how you will. In my opinion, if they use it in their own portals, you're fine to use it in your automation processes as well. However, I just wanted to highlight that. The problem with the beta is that because it is supposedly a beta, there isn't a lot of documentation there yet. It's meant to exist when, of course, it finally moves to version 1.0. But at this point, there have been so many updates to the beta, so many extra features, data endpoints that you cannot reach with the 1.0, that you're going to have to use the beta to get certain stuff. It's a little annoying, but that means that, well, finding out which permissions you need to grant to be able to grab stuff is it's a bit of a guessing game sometimes. It's mostly the usual suspects, like device configuration, read writes, or device management apps or something like that. But you're gonna have to well, fumble around a little bit if there is a particular endpoint that you're trying to reach but can't find it. All right. However, I won't go deeper into that in this particular session. I do have another one where I explain all the quirks of the Graph API, but that's not for this evening, because I could talk about that for quite a while. Finally, for the app registration, you also need to think about the authentication method you're going to be using. Probably the easiest way to do it is with a client secret, which works relatively easy. You can also do a certificate, which is a bit more secure, but also a bit more difficult and complex to set up and maintain. There's, of course, also delegated access, which works not particularly great in automation setups. So I would not recommend it, but that does technically work. But I definitely wouldn't recommend that. If you want to set up something simple and small, maybe even medium-sized, the client secret would probably be the way to go, in my opinion. If you want to have a robust production-ready, scalable solution, I would say definitely should go into certificates. All right. Again, how exactly you do that is not the subject of this evening. Luckily, there's plenty of documentation for that present from Microsoft. All right. Gathering and processing the data. So we're going to assume we have all the data from Intune that we need, that we wanted. So now what are we going to do with it? You can obviously use a script. That's the easiest way to set it up. You can use Python, you can use PowerShell. Personally, I use a lot of PowerShell. It works very well with the complex objects the Graph API spits out. And it has a great module called the Microsoft Graph Authentication module, which is made and maintained by Microsoft specifically for the Graph API. It does a bunch of built-in error handling and response objects formatting a little bit. However, it doesn't do everything. Stuff like pagination you still have to do yourself. But it works great to quickly get something going. In the actual automations that I have set up, I usually do manual HTTP requests, but I prefer a little bit more control. So that's why I do it like that. But it's definitely a good option and a good solution. So I can recommend it. We also need some platform to recurrently run those scripts on. I have a couple suggestions. There's, of course, the automation account on Azure. It used to be the #1 option for any automation that you needed to run in the cloud. However, there's a big issue with the automation account, and that is, of course, memory limits. Depending on the amount of data you're going to be processing, so smaller organizations should probably be fine, but as soon as you're reaching about 1,000 users or up, the automation account is definitely not gonna have what you need. You're gonna run out of memory real soon. So I could definitely recommend instead using function apps, which are also very easily maintainable and easy to set up. They can also be scheduled, and you can actually customize the amount of memory they need. So that means you can start off with a small amount, and then if you scale up and you need more memory, you can change that on the fly at a later date. The automation account does not have such options, which is why maybe for a temporary or only small limited setup, but if you expect large throughput, then you shouldn't go ahead and use those. You can also, of course, use like an automation platform like Ansible, but that it's maybe a little bit of overkill for something like this. But if you have a platform like this in your organization, it's easy to just use it for something like this. Finally, the alerts and reports themselves. How are we going to manage and maintain those? We have to store the process data somewhere. For example, a log analytics workspace on Azure is a great way to do that. You can also, of course, use something like a Cosmos DB, again on Azure. This is the 365 user group, of course, so we are talking Microsoft only today. But there are plenty of options to go ahead for storing the data. However, I can recommend the log analytics workspace because if we're looking into setting up alert rules and reports, again, alert rules on Azure, which is part of the Azure Monitor, they work very well in sync with the log analytics workspace. You can set up alert rules based on log queries using the Custo query language. So that means any data you have set up in log analytics, you can immediately query yourself directly without having to set up some integration or in between to actually read out the data. So that works very well. Also, workbooks on Azure is a great way for setting up some reports. And again, very compatible with the log analytics workspace. It can directly read out tables from there. So that's also easy to set up, pulls it straight from the log analytics workspace. If you want to do something, again, a bit bigger, more scalable, a bit more robust, probably looking into some data factory or using, I'm completely spacing on the name, but everybody knows what I'm talking about. The #1 reporting language. It'll get back to me in like 2 minutes. Anyway, there are other options for bigger organizations. However, I found that this, unless you want to do like complex analysis of historical data, this works well up to like 10,000 users. This should be fine. All right. Then, having talked about all of that, what does a finished flow possibly look like? Well, I made a little diagram. You have Intune with all kinds of data you want to pull in. So a PowerShell running in a function app would pull that in using the app registration, and then sends it to a table or possibly multiple tables of a log analytics workspace, which then gets reporting done in a workbook and alerts on using the alert rules. It's very simple. This is everything we just discussed. Of course, this is a relatively simple setup. This doesn't look into secret management. This doesn't look into integrations with other tools. This is just a good way to get going, and definitely works on a smaller scale, I would say. Of course, there is another thing we can do, namely an alternate data flow. What if you don't want to store the data? You say, screw historical data, who needs that? Well, you can, of course, just gather the data from Intune itself and then well, perform the logic for the alerts in the script itself. There's less infrastructure. You only need the function app. You need some scripts, app registration. That's it. No storing the data. No Custo queries. No anything extra complex. More infrastructure not needed. However, if you want to do extensive alerting, that gets complicated. Well, rather fast, of course, and reporting gets. Well, I said no easy reporting, but if you're not storing the data, then reporting becomes very hard. So because all the logic happens in the script, this is also not very scalable. So the moment you hit like 10, well, maybe even 5 alerts, it becomes a little complex to keep track of everything that's happening. and depending on how you have set up your organization, well, that could be easier or more difficult to actually make changes to it. I don't know if anybody could access the code base or not. All right. I think that is most of what I wanted to say tonight. There are some links. The slides and some resources are available on the GitHub. And I see that I have a little bit of time left over, which is great. So if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thanks so much. Yeah, you're absolutely speaking my language with automation and graph. Do you, because you mentioned the MSAL library, do you use, or what's your thoughts on the graph SDK?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question very well. Could you please state it again?
Yeah. You mentioned the Microsoft Authentication Library and running Graph directly, Graph queries directly. Have you used the Microsoft Graph SDK for PowerShell?
I have not. I've used mostly just endpoints, manually myself. I've dabbled a little bit with some modules that Microsoft built themselves, but I usually run into issues that we wanted to do stuff that was available, but not yet updated within the established resources. So that made me switch over to just manual all the way really fast. So no, I don't have a lot of experience with the Graph SDK now.
Yeah, for that same reason, right? I think it doesn't always have, particularly if you're using beta endpoints, doesn't always have everything that you need in there. So it can be fine for some things.
It's a little bit of a give and take because, well, you use the beta and it's an API, so it isn't supposed to change, but it does happen every now and then. And of course, if you use the existing resources, if changes happen in the backend, those resources will update. But then if you do it yourself, you have to update them yourself. So that is a little bit of extra maintenance, of course. But I found that it's relatively, as soon as something appears on the data and is actually working, I found that any changes don't really occur. I've maybe had it twice in the last 5 years that we had something specifically on Intune that broke because Microsoft changed something or like some way in the backend. And one of those 2 times was because I did something really funky to actually access something that I wasn't supposed to get. So that was on me anyway. But yeah, I get what you're saying.
I've had solutions fall apart because the format of the data changed.
Yeah. Yeah. I've had a fun issue recently with the reporting feature specifically for Defender and Firewall. I was pulling in, and like the whole way how that worked changed like over a couple of weeks. So then suddenly, like what I was trying to pull in was erroring, and the data then I got again was different. So I had to rewrite a bunch of flows to actually format it in the way it was supposed to be for our actual setup. So that was fun. I just got back from a holiday as well, so that was a fun week.
And then you got to remember how you built it.
Exactly. Yeah, I try to document everything, of course, but I don't know if you've had that before, but my colleagues don't always read the documentation I write. So yeah, sometimes I question what's the point, but you try your best.
Yeah. Okay. Oni or Frank, anything that you'd like to add?
No, I'm good. We don't have any questions in the chat either, so.
Right. So again, thanks so much for the session, and
yeah, no problem.
Like I said, it's right up my street. So exactly the type of stuff I like to do in my spare time, because just don't have a life. But we'd love to have you back sometime, and thanks so much.
Sure. I'd love to be here again. I actually have a Graph API session specifically on that and all the quirks. So if you're interested in that, let me know. If anyone else is interested in this session specifically, but a bit more extensive and with some actual examples and flows being set up and demos, I'm actually at a day event in June at Workplace Ninjas Belgium. I think it's the 4th of June. So if you have time to get down there, I actually have this session again, but in a bit more detail.
Awesome.
Right.
If you ping me on that, I can share it out as well.
Sure. Let me look up the link.
Sure. Okay. So I think we'll leave it there. And thanks so much to our guests, and thanks for everybody for joining. We will be on again at the end of next month.
Yeah,
Thanks,
I'm just going.
Thanks, Bas.
Yeah, I'm just going to end the live session. Can one of you just stay on for a second? I just want to test something there at the end.
Sure.
Sure.